Hey everybody, how's it going? Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I've got one of my favorite people to talk to today. I'm sure most of you have already subscribed to his channel, but if for some reason you have not, I've got his links below. Morgoth is great because he always comes at things at a very different and interesting angle. And so I always enjoy his perspective because it's always just a little bit outside of what others are saying. And I think he always brings a bunch of wisdom to kind of whatever he's addressing. So make sure you're checking out his YouTube channel if you're not. And Morgoth, thank you so much for joining me.
Hello again. It's been a while. Nice to be back on.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about Spangler the whole time, which is always disappointing because that's one of the great things
Yeah,
about talking to you.
that was a great stream. Yeah, that was a great stream we did. I really enjoyed that one.
Absolutely, yeah. You have like a great knowledge of Spangler, and so that's really enjoyable. Um, but uh, but today we're here for a different reason, because obviously we had the World Economic Forum. Like Davos is meeting Davos and everything here recently, and I thought to myself, these people are so cartoonishly evil, the things they're talking about. And I was like, who's very good on this, who's always kind of got their eye on the ball of this is Morgoth. And then I shot you a message and you're like, actually, I just read a blog post and did a video on this. So turns out I was thinking of the right person. Um, but I guess just for those who don't know, they had this meeting, of course, and they're always talking to these different elite people running different corporations, world leaders, heads of NGOs, that kind of thing. And there were some really amazing moments we'll go over here in a little bit. But maybe you just want to give your general outlook. Why do they, when they have these meetings, are they so willing to kind of have talks out in the open about kind of these dystopian plans that they have? What is it that kind of drives these people to have these, which you would think are very behind closed doors, secretive conversations out in the public, advertising what's going on?
I mean, it's an open question, to be honest, and I kind of left it open on my recent video and blog post. But I mean, there's a few different kind of takes on that, and the most obvious one is that they don't really care what we think, and that they are um, basically talking to themselves. I mean, what the World Economic Forum actually is, and people will always point this out as well, like they aren't really it's kind of complicated because they can't. It is a talking shop. It is like a whole gaggle of different kinds of public-private partnerships and technocrats and people from the political world and all of this. So it isn't sort of one. It's more like an umbrella thing where somebody will come from tech and somebody will come from the transhuman agenda, somebody will come from the UN, and some like the top boy of Nokia was there coming out with some strange stuff about chipping people. So it isn't like it's kind of a cohesive block, and it isn't. And what it really is that it's kind of like the Moldbug thing of how about decentralized power. They're all off doing their own thing and working on their own projects, and you'll notice that it kind of does all go in a certain direction, which we can get onto in a bit. And so the meetup at Davos is kind of like where they all get together and have a big old shindig and kind of pat each other on the back and look at what they're all coming out with. But what binds it all together is like a vision of the future, which they do want and which they are like serious about. So it's kind of like on the one hand, you've got this ancient old man wearing his weird Masonic sort of James Bond garb, Blofeld garb. And it's some of the stuff they come out with is ridiculous and cringe, but there is also like a really dark aspect to it all as well. I mean, other people will say that mainly it's a kind of psyop to take your eye away from the real power, say in the American deep state or something like that, because it's taboo to talk about certain other sections of the elite, and it isn't taboo to talk about Klaus Schwab or Bill Gates. At the same time, though, that's true, but it's becoming quite taboo to talk about policy and things that they want to do. That is becoming. I lost my Patreon at the beginning of the year, which was like half of everything that I earned from the internet, and that was directly related to things which these people don't want you speaking about. So there's a bite to it when you criticize policy and the ideas that they want to do, and they'll also just come straight out and tell you that as well. There was some woman there, like basically coming out and saying we need to rethink free speech again, and it's just sort of drafting out all of this legislation that you will soon see pop up at the governmental level. So the idea that why they just come straight out with this stuff is an open question. One thing I will say, which is my general view on that question, is unlike other sort of elites of the past and the present, they are very much in with the latest technology and what the technology will be going in the future. And I think that's kind of their mindset. That I think it's a kind of hubris that they've got, that whatever problems arise, they will be able to fix it through algorithmic manipulation and through basically just through technology. They will be able to protect their own narratives. If somebody makes a mistake, they don't care. They'll just have them banned. They'll be able to sort of dial up their friendlies and dial down things. So they live very much that they're kind of the way they do their narratives. It's very much here today, gone tomorrow, kind of rolling Twitter trends, which is kind of like the mentality of the technocrat in a way on social media. It's how they do things. It's very much in the moment. That's why you like, since they have become so powerful, you see stories like one week it's a complete crisis, and then a week later it's just completely gone from the news. Everything's very much in the moment, and I think that's made them kind of arrogant. And I think that's also been a mistake that they've made.
Yeah, there's so much I want to go. We're going to go into a bunch of different directions with that because there's a lot of different things I want to address with what you just said there. So we'll just have to do it a little bit at a time. I want to pick out a couple of threads that I liked from what you were talking about there. The first one is kind of the celebration parallax type nature of what you can talk about with what they're doing, right? It's the same thing we see with things like demographic replacement. Like, you're allowed to brag about it as long as you say it's good, but if you deny that it's happening, then you're a conspiracy. Or if you don't like that it's happening, then acknowledging existence is a conspiracy theory. Feels like there's a very similar thing with what they're doing, right? Like, you can, if you're talking about the Great Reset as a positive thing, you can even use it in slogans like Justin Trudeau did, right? But if you say that it's a bad thing, then actually that's a conspiracy theory and you should be banned from talking about it.
Yeah. I mean, another example that I gave in my blog post was the Build Back Better campaign. That came straight out of the World Economic Forum. And then it was just this strange thing. It's like what I mean about the technology. Everything is in the moment, where just out of the blue, all of the politicians were coming out, like, just kind of repeating this slogan, like all over the place, from New Zealand to Canada to Britain to America, all across the West. They were all just coming out with this slogan. And then they mustn't have liked how it was playing, so they just dropped it, and you don't hear it anymore. Just like that, just gone. But the policy is still in place, both in Britain and America. That is still there. You can see there is a clear, like, that Build Back Better has actually become the official slogan of the Tory party or something.
Well, it's what Joe Biden's slogan was. Like, it was his official campaign slogan. And it's like, it doesn't give you pause that like Boris Johnson and Joe Biden and like Angela Merkel all have the same campaign slogan. Like, it's very odd.
And so you have to think, is it that they are signaling to each other? Or is it are we supposed to get on board with this? Are we supposed to get excited for Building Back Better? It also came along so early during the last few years, during the pandemic. It came along so early that a lot of people were thinking, like, well, Build Back Better from what? Like, that we've got the plague, but except for that, like, what exactly are we going to build, and how is it going to be better? And what they really meant was the digital world that they're so proud of and so excited about, which you'll hear them gushing about on the podium at the annual shindig that they've just had.
Well, yeah, one of my favorite glitch in the Matrix moments was one of my buddies, Bog Beef, caught this on. He was on Google, and on like the news stream, like one story was about the conspiracy theory of the Great Reset. Like the Great Reset is a conspiracy theory, and literally the next story in like the Google News trending was about like Justin Trudeau talking about how great the or how awesome the Great Reset would be. And so like the like side by side, Google was promoting two news stories, one saying that it's a conspiracy theory and one saying how great it was. And
Yeah.
just that moment where like the algorithm didn't understand, the contradiction and like why it was okay for one to be promoted and one to be denounced. I just thought
Yeah,
it
and
was amazing.
yeah, so I think what this hubris that they've got because of their mastery of like the most modern technology and the technology going into the future, it's given them a sort of god complex where in the past elites. I mean, in me blog post, I kind of contrasted this with neocons and what their agenda was. And if you have a look at their messaging, it was quite well crafted. I mean, even the counter narrative of the left would say that, well, these wars in the Middle East are all about just oil, and not and it would never really be the focus of a certain country in the Middle East sort of benefiting the most from all of these dictators being whacked over a short period of years, for example. So the messaging was really on point and the narrative was well crafted, and you can they've been much better at the. Another example would be the Bilderberger group, who they've been very secretive. You hardly even know. I don't even know if it's going on this year, but they too have like an annual meeting. I think it's in the same place, in Switzerland, and you just never hear about that, and you don't know what they discuss. Nothing. And so then you've got like the World Economic Forum coming out, and it's like a U2 rock concert or something. It's all big screens, and even the promotional videos with like it's all slick and it's all this xylophone stuff. And I think it's arrogance, and I think it's hubris, because they think in the digital world, and they always use these kinds of terms as well. In and Klaus Schwab like literally said, we are building the future, and it's all connected to this mastery of the digital realm, which they seem to think they're like the architect from the Matrix or something. So if a narrative kind of goes a little bit wrong, it doesn't matter. I think they just think they can fix it all just by changing the algorithms. But the problem is, I think that you see more and more people. There's more and more of a backlash against it, because people don't really think like that. People kind of get suspicious, and they their suspicions about the last thing, the last sort of narrative paradox, is still kind of niggling at them, and then they get another one, and then another one, and then another one, and so they accumulate more and more kind of narrative baggage, which doesn't make sense until you get to the point it's just complete distrust.
Well, I also think that this reminds me a lot of in the U.S. when we had the group of people come out in Time magazine and say like, yeah, basically like we altered the election, like we were the ones who did it. Like it literally used the phrase a shadowy cabal of people like saved the election. And I think there's a couple things. Like one, they're just taking a victory lap. Like you said, it's just hubris. Like they're doing it. They want to be able to talk about it in the open. Like they're like, we're the rulers of the universe. We're the masters of the universe. And we should be able to just tell people about it. And we shouldn't have to like hide this and be ashamed. So I think that's part of it. But another part of it, I think, is like, they're just used to thinking that they can, they really think like if they can just explain like, no, we're good, we're doing this for your good, like you'll just own nothing and you'll be happy. And that like sounds weird because you're a pleb and you don't understand what's good for you, but like we'll explain it, and eventually you'll get on board with the program, because this has worked for them so many times in the past, right? Like they did this with all kinds of stuff: the dissolution of the family, the destruction of things like Christianity, the immigration, globalization. Like these are all things that if they had just come out at the very beginning and mentioned them, nobody would have gotten on board with. But because they kind of slowly boiled the frog, eventually they could just state their agenda. And today most people kind of just echo that and parrot it back, and they feel like they should just be able to do that one more time, right?
Yeah, I mean, another obvious point about this particular the World Economic Forum is that they can't be voted out. Then they're not. They don't have to even lie to the public, because you can't do anything about it anyway. So
Mm-hmm.
even if you are angry, then what are you going to do? And the kind of another thing is, which people will point out, is that they can't create policy. But this is where it all begins to get kind of shady and a little bit odd, because you have to have a look like more carefully at what exactly it is like they want to do. What is it? What is the plan? What actually is the Great Reset? And you can, what is the deal with having all of these people embedded in all of these governments across the world, which was like another thing that Klaus Schwab just came straight out and said, yeah, we've got people embedded in governments all over the world.
Yeah.
And so what it is that, well, yeah, the people at Davos, they can't actually create policy, but what they themselves are doing is sort of creating the conditions, and then policy will flow from that. And a lot of it is policy which is coming straight from the United Nations, and the biggest one, the big daddy behind all of these different things, is the sustainability thing, the 2030 agenda. And I think, I mean, a lot of people on the right, definitely including me, kind of ignored that and thought it was like low hanging fruit, and it was something like in Britain, people like James Delingpole and libertarians were kind of obsessed with this for years and years, and it was like they were constantly jumping up and down and screaming and saying, like, you don't understand how serious this is. But a lot of people on the right were thinking, oh, it's just this eco mumbo jumbo, like, we don't care. It's and now you begin to see like the full horror and scale of what it is, which is being kind of implemented. And it's people really should take this stuff seriously.
Yeah, it's kind of the ideological skeleton that kind of binds a lot of what they want to do together, and that and now pandemic preparedness, I think, are kind of a 1-2 punch of kind of justifying a lot of things that, like you said, a lot of us kind of said, "Oh, that'll never happen. They'll never get those through. They're just not, it's not popular enough. Not enough people care." But they've just kind of chanted this mantra in the background for so long that it's infiltrated a lot of these different organizations. But I wanted to focus on another part that you mentioned there that I really liked. You were saying, it kind of has this Mulbugian decentralized coordination aspect to it, which I think is very true. And one of the things that I think one of the things that I think is interesting is, like you said, a lot of these people come from different backgrounds. They're not necessarily in the same disciplines. There's a lot of people who aren't in formal government apparatus or anything like that. But there's this coalition. They seem to orbit the same goal, and I think what we're seeing is and I'm gonna do this because this is my hobby horse, but I think what we're seeing is the globalization of the managerial class interest coming to fruition, right? Like these are all the thing that binds these people together, the thing that creates this decentralized consensus is this managerial class interest, and it stretches across countries at this point. It's no longer just managers inside the United States or managers inside the UK or wherever. It's now a global class that stretches across
Yeah.
all interconnected civilizations. And Christopher Lasch actually specifically warned against this, that eventually this elite managerial class would become so deracinated that it would be they'd have far more in common with each other and their goals than they would with the people they rule in the actual countries they ostensibly are loyal to.
Yeah, I did a video last year on YouTube called "The Elephant and the Whale," And it was quite a lengthy one for me. It was about 36 minutes long, and it was really me trying to get to grips with what exactly this is. And I contrasted the sort of nation state model going back through history, where you traditionally you would have the land power versus the sea power. And so where a lot with somebody like Napoleon, you and Britain, it would be like the elephant versus the whale. They've each got their own domains, and ultimate victory comes very hard. But oftentimes it will be the elephant or the whale, sorry, over the long duration. So if we look at the traditional nation state model, as you know, as we usually would, I think that has become the elephant, and that this kind of international technocracy, technocrat, elite class, whatever you want to call them, they have become the whale relative to the nation state, because they are in a position to just shift things around the world, especially in the digital realm, just willy nilly. And the power is becoming more and more lifted out of the hands of the local government, the local state, and placed into the hands of these international bodies. I mean, the UN has kind of been stagnant for a long time. People write it off as being toothless, but it's writing quite a lot of legislation at the moment, which is being handed down. And then you've got the IMF, you've got the World Health Organization. So it isn't just like Klaus Blofeld in like sort of being a Bonneville and controlling the world. What it is like a massive network of extremely powerful NGOs, organizations, foundations, which are now in drafting policy and taking power away from the nation state. And it's extremely dangerous, because if you look at something like what we've been through for the last 2 years, a lot of people were confused, because why was I mean, I know this is a spicy topic for Susan, and this is where we begin to run in, because we think, hang on a minute, why are we being censored for discussing things they don't like, as if it was hate speech or something like that, when what were you really talking about is like medical things. So I'm well aware of the problem with that. So I won't, I'll be careful. But the fact is, the response across the world was more or less uniform. You would expect each of the nation states to deal with it in their own different way because of their own cultures and everything. It was actually like almost the exact same plan that was implemented everywhere. Now, this says that it's coming like this. That's not possible if the nation states are just carrying out their own health policies. And what it was that it came informally from the World Health Organization. And with, especially in some of the poorer countries, the IMF acting as a sort of the money bags and bribing them. And what they're doing now in the process is having a formal treaty, so that it will just be policy, will just come directly from the World Health Organization. So when you look at what we've been through for the last few years and you think what could possibly happen in the future, it's not so much of a laughing matter anymore.
Yeah, it's really, I spend a shocking amount of time, and it's easy for us in these circles. It seems obvious to us a lot of times, some of this stuff, and I forget when I talk to kind of more mainstream people how unfamiliar they are with some of these concepts. I spend a lot of time explaining to like very mainstream and people who have like a pretty big platform that like legislation is not made by our legislative bodies. Like the like policy is not actually generated by people in like the American Congress or the British Parliament. And that if you are looking to these for solutions or restrictions, you completely don't understand how like basic power now works in the vast majority of Western nations. And so because they're so focused on that and they're so focused to this on the circus at that level, they have a really hard time understanding that the things that are oppressing them, the things that are bringing policy against them, are not these legislators. They're these, like you said, those technocratic experts, the bureaucrats, the deep states, and increasingly, because like you said, these things are escaping the nation state and are now being handed over to these NGOs or these world organizations. Yeah, you can laugh at the UN all you want, but if the UN is a space in which managerial elites, or if the World Economic Forum is a place where managerial elites can get together and formulate and create draft policies and white papers and studies and push all these things down, that effectively is a super legislature, right? That effectively is these things. They serve the same function. In fact, they do it better than actual legislatures do at this point. And so I think the fact that these people are dictating policy basically globally at this point through this network is very difficult for people to grasp. They're still stuck down in these these individual national battles over elections and things, and it completely obfuscates to them the actual places and centers of power where this stuff is flowing from.
Yeah, and when you dig deeper into it, it gets darker and darker, because you see just how far they have gone and just how sort of entrenched all of this is. I mean, I just wrote a few notes, and I can tell people what's called the Fourth Industrial Revolution or the Great Reset actually is, and I've wrote down the things. So you've got one, health, which I'm sure we're all familiar. That, again, like this, normally this would be seen as something not of that much interest to people in the right, people on the sort of dissident right circles. But now I think we've changed our mind about that now, because what we've seen is that these boys, they may be cringe, but they will rock and roll when they want something done. Like, that's the lesson. And then number 2 is surveillance. Number 3, which is the big one, is the climate change. You've got number 4, which is the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which amounts to the automation of everything and everything else that I'm reading out. Then you've got digital currencies, and then you've got smart cities and everything which goes along with that. So they're an ambitious they're an ambitious kind of bunch. I think it's worth also just kind of outlining basically what people mean when they say technocrat, because a technocrat is basically ruled by experts, and it seems to always take on this Malthusian kind of flavor. I mean, strictly speaking, the Soviet Union was a technocracy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So what you see is that in theory they can say, well, socialism is a technocratic because it's scientifically proven. And so therefore, who are you to argue against the science? Like, if you're arguing against the experts, the scientists. And so the problem then, and so this language will be familiar with people. And so if you're going to use all of these technologies to reorder the world along the lines of a technocracy, what you're doing is placing the experts and the scientists in positions of supreme authority beyond considerations of anything else. And it always sort of devolves into a sort of cold-hearted Malthusian kind of nightmare, I think. It did in the Soviet Union.
Well, this is now that let's make everybody angry. So James Burnham, this was his point, right? Was that that Soviet communism, fascism, and American bureaucratic state were all different flavors of managerialism, right? They were all managerial states. And that was his thesis, is that wherever you turn, the modern world is run by managerial elites. It's just how they're organized and the kind of the type of power they're using at that moment. And so the fact that this system, whether it is applied to communism or American liberalism or whatever, the fact that this system of managerialism is basically universal is what allows this coordination across what are in theory different cultures and different forms of government. They still all share this same trait of technocracy, right? And that's also what allows them to push these things down, because even if you change out the legislators, right? Even if you vote Labor out and you get the conservatives in, or you vote the Democrats out and you get the Republicans in, the people who are still running things are the managers, and they are still in their positions. They're still in those technocratic positions. So they also follow all of the ideas that come down from those NGOs and those global organizations. So they're still kind of in that hive mind. They're still in that shared uh, decision making matrix, even if you switch out the people who are theoretically formally in charge of the nation.
I mean, an example of this is that when you sometimes we'll see things sort of pop up in the zeitgeist, and you think, isn't that a weird thing? Isn't that strange? And an example of this would be going all the way back to sort of Paul Joseph Watson and the his videos that he was doing back in like 2017, when he was talking about these really kind of cringe articles about how people would be eating like maggot sausages and stuff. And it's a strange thing because everyone was like, what the hell? And people assumed it was just some kind of weird new lefty fad. But the problem is it didn't disappear. It didn't because, you know, if you've got the free market, under free market principles, no normal person is going to go out and buy maggot sausages or what were like 3D printed steaks and all of this other stuff they're kind of pushing. And pushing is the word here, because under free market principles, that would have gone away because nobody wants to buy it, but it doesn't. And in actual fact, they're pushing it harder and harder all of the time. They don't feel, and it isn't this kind of thing where what do you call it when you've already spent some cost fallacy. It isn't that, because they would have just cut their losses by now. They know something, and what they know, then they've invested billions in this. What they know, because they're part of this network, is that at the higher echelons within the UN, and then further in all of these institutions, and I can come on to that as well in a moment, is that the climate change agenda 2030 is going to make it so that meat becomes extremely expensive and just phased out entirely eventually. And so when you begin to see that, then you've joined a few dots up, because they're not stupid. They're not wasting money on some lefty fad. What they're doing is investing in something which is going to be the next big thing in the future. I mean, AA did a terrific stream about the Beyond Meat, that it seems like no matter how, it's like you go into the supermarket and everything has been cleared out. I mean, and all that's left is the non-alcoholic lager and Beyond Meat products, and the non-alcoholic beer and Beyond Meat is all that's left. Now, you'd think somebody would say, well, look, we're not making any money on this. Can we just quit? And they're not. They're just pumping more and more and more into it because they know the future. Now, what this does, and this is also how Elon Musk's become so rich on his lithium batteries, because what this is doing is creating incentives for the billionaire class to kind of get on board and jump in on the next big thing, because they know that eventually policy is going to be implemented, which will just make it so that you can't buy anything except the sort of 3D printed meat, on where the demand for lithium batteries will be sky high. It isn't at the moment, but they know that policy is going to be is in the process of coming down the river, that will ensure that that's going to be in the future. And they've even formalized this. This is what's called the it's even got a Wikipedia page: environmental, social, and corporate governance. So this is where you get into like stakeholder capitalism, and basically it's a fusion of corporations and the state. And what they're doing is creating incentives with each other to its control, because they're buying up everything. But they know what the policy is. They know what's coming, so they know to invest in it.
Yeah, one of the best things that ever happened to the ruling elite was the ability to move power into informal structures like corporations, right? So that you can play the shell game between the state and the corporation. It's not the state that's censoring you; it's the tech company. It's not the state that's forcing you to, not be able to buy a home. It's the corporations are just using their free market ability to buy housing. But then when the state comes behind and creates regulations and alters the playing field, they're separate from the corporation, and so they get to kind of put, they get to use different weapons at different times with different rules by shifting which node is kind of exercising power. And you're right, AA did a great stream on that. He's hit that very hard about how there isn't really a market demand for this, and like you said, that leaves you scratching your head unless you realize that this is an investment. And this is a lot of things, like you were saying, I like a lot of people discounted the environmental movement because I was like, look, it's just not a winning issue. No one cares. Like, no one actually is willing to make these kind of sacrifices. It's never going to happen. And, don't worry about it. They're just wasting their energy. But if they can slowly strangle every other option through technocratic means of shutting those things down, then eventually, you are required to conform to that narrative. And we saw a lot of this in the recent economic forum. Like you said, there's a lot of people standing on stage and saying insane things that you don't think anyone would say out loud. We have to rethink free speech is something we're hearing a lot, and the best part is we have to do that in the name of democracy, right? They say that all the time. There also, we had the I believe it was the head of Pfizer saying that we can put a chip in prescription drugs that dissolves, so that if you take it, we can track your compliance. And that's literally the word he used: track your compliance. Like, this is a great way to track your compliance. And then another, I forget which one it was, but another one of the guests was talking about how basically they can make trackers that are going to basically check every bit of your carbon footprint. They're going to check how much carbon you're using, how much pollution you're creating, all this stuff at every turn, and then limit your access to things based on that. Again, this is all like Alex Jones conspiracy stuff that if he said it 5 years ago, forget 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 5 years ago, if he was saying any of that, everyone would have rolled their eyes. Okay, tinfoil hat man, you're crazy. Keep screaming and ripping your shirt off. And he's just right about all of this. All of this has come true. And it's not just come true. The people who are planning to implement it, say it out loud as if it's a good thing, because like you said, they believe that anything can be solved through technology and this idea of nudging, right? If we can just nudge people into this and that, we'll just shut down one of their choices and incentivize the other. And eventually all the humans will conform. We can rewrite human behavior by just shutting down slowly access. And that's why, like you said, the technology is so important to this, because if you can digitize everything, if you can eliminate cash, and you can force everyone into these social credit systems, and you can make everyone's employment reliant on this constant panopticon monitoring system, then you can control basically every single aspect of human interaction and guide them towards the brilliant future.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about the environmental social, which is ESGs, sorry, is that when you look at it, there's a few other things begin to kind of click into place. And what you'll notice about this is that, like, in theory, the sustainability agenda has got nothing to do with the global health, but all of these different things have a habit of kind of closing around us and then locking together. And so I'll just, like I say, this is a Wikipedia page. It's all right out in the open, and it just says the ESG is an approach to evaluating the extent to which a corporation works on behalf of social goals that go beyond the role of a corporation to maximize profits on behalf of the corporation's shareholders. So this is stakeholder capitalism, which is slightly different to, say, definitely to classic liberalism or neoliberalism, because what they're saying is that the corporation has to have a set of ethics, and it has to have a sort of duty to society beyond just maximizing their profits, regardless of political narratives. And you can see here, like, this is beginning to sound like woke capitalism, to be honest, because it says typically the social goals advocated with an ESG perspective include working to achieve a certain set of environmental goals, as well as a set of goals having to do with supporting certain social movements, of course, and a third set of goals having to do with whether the corporation is governed in a way that is consistent with the goals of diversity, equity, and inclusive movement. A variety of governmental organizations and financial institutions have devised ways to measure the extent to which a specific corporation is aligned with the ESG goals. So these giant corporations are themselves already operating in what amounts to a sort of social credit system where they're being marked. Now, the Wikipedia page goes into more detail about how that came about, but this is exactly the kind of thing that the World Economic Forum is in negotiations with the United Nations and the Bank of International Settlements to bring in. So what they're doing is setting a set of rules where, for example, if Coca-Cola decides to be a bit reactionary and it doesn't want to have rainbow flags, it doesn't support BLM and all the rest of it, they will actually get marked down in their ESG score, which will affect their shareholders. So they're already in a social credit system. And if you think this is like kind of cookie stuff, it says here, in less than 20 years, the ESG movement has grown from a corporate social responsibility initiative launched by the United Nations into a global phenomenon representing more than 30 trillion US dollars in assets under management. In the year 2019, which is a year when all hell broke loose, of course, capital totaling 17 billion flowed into ESG-linked products, an almost 525% increase from 2015. So the point of all of that is that they've actually got their own value system, their own social credit system, which they're marked against, which isn't just about it isn't just about earning money for shareholders as we usually thought capitalism. So this is the public-private partnerships, which everybody's probably heard them say more and more, or what someone like Schwab would call stakeholder capitalism. Now these corporations and these entities have a stake in how society is run, and you can see that they've got that kind of social justice stuff sort of kind of buried into the DNA of the entire framework of the system. And it's funny because when you go back and you think how crazy things went with the George Floyd, BLM, everything that, you know, the next big thing. And it seems to me that a lot of these corporations have a duty to go along with it because it's within their ESG. They don't want to get marked down in the ESG ratings because it'll hurt the bottom line. It'll hurt their shareholders. It'll be, you know, it'll work against them. So it's as if they've got them all by the short and curlies. It gets pretty dark, all of this.
I decided to leave my mute on there. Yeah, so I love that, for instance, Twitter has a civic integrity policy. Like that's one of my favorite things is like Twitter has a policy as to what speech it allows and what it doesn't, based on whether or not they like if someone who's rebelling against like a foreign government, what they say, like how they feel about that government. So they have a policy where they will alter the ability of people to communicate, or they allow, like we saw with the Ukrainian conflict, right? They'll allow praise of like neo-Nazis and stuff if they're currently in conflict with like Putin. Like that's the key. Or they'll shut down communications or open up communications about like a revolution or a rebellion or some kind of civic action inside a country entirely based on whether or not they approve of the government that's being challenged or not. And so these these companies, not only do they understand that they need to go along with the correct agenda, they actually like are creating active policies that say we are allowed to more or less alter elections or communications inside a country, even if it's in the middle of a conflict, depending on how kind of the current thing dictates that we act, whatever the zeitgeist is from kind of the powers on high about how we should feel about that particular conflict or cultural kind of revolution.
I mean, you saw it with the Russia kind of situation where all of a sudden Russia invades Ukraine, and then it's decided that he's definitely crossed the line there. And it comes in where all of these corporations go. I mean, they use this language as well, like lockstep, and they all, like within a week, just completely pulled all of their products from Russian shelves. And I think there's one or two of them still there. But by and large, there's a sort of purity spiraling element to it, you know. So if one corporation, say the first one, maybe Burger King, and says, well, we're going to just shut down all our restaurants in Russia, then the next one, maybe McDonald's, thinks, well, now I'm going to look bad because it looks like I'm too soft on Putin. So then I'm going to have to do that as well. And then one by one, they all go down. And then, you know, if it's decided that they'll have to make a sort of calculation, is this going to affect our ESG scores? And they probably got the message from somewhere that, well, yeah, it is. And so it's pretty dystopian because it's like they own everything. I mean, especially when you bring in firms like BlackRock, who are all on board with this kind of thing.
Well, and not only that, like not only do they have this this overarching policy, like you're talking about, that the score they need to worry about from kind of the top down Davos end, but they also have basically fifth columns in every country now. You can look at the way that this worked with Disney when Florida passed the bill against grooming. You know, they originally, Disney didn't have anything to say about this. Originally, they were just going to let it, you know, whatever. They weren't going to comment on it. But then the pressure came, right, from all these activists from all these different areas. All of a sudden, there was this outcry from all these these different people who were informed about how they were supposed to feel about this, and they were the ones that pressured Disney to eventually bring to have this emergency meeting and declare, their number one allegiance to be, forcing this gender ideology onto children. And so even it's not just top down, there's also like a populist fifth column inside each country that, like, they just, we've made this joke a million times, but they just download the current thing into the NPCs, and then the mob will come from that corporation, the bottom up as well, to force them into compliance. Like, even if they had no interest in, fighting back against this particular piece of legislation or restriction, the orders get downloaded, and all of a sudden these corporations are forced by the ideologues that have been implanted into their own structure that they need to now go after this thing. Their own commissars threaten to shoot them in the back if they don't charge, this hill.
Yeah. An interesting part of it as well is when you bring in the digital ID, because they sell it as being a medical thing. I mean, I made a sometimes on Substack where I've got a lot of exclusive content up on Substack, where you can support me for like the price of a coffee a month, get that little shill in there. And sometimes I do these monologues, which are just for Substack subscribers. I did one last week, and it was about something which happened in China, where I saw like a video on Telegram, and what had happened was that there was this huge stampede at a supermarket in China. It was chaos. There was women screaming. The security guards couldn't cope. Now, what had happened was that inside the supermarket, it was absolute chaos. And what had happened was that inside the supermarket, they have got this zero COVID policy. And inside the supermarket, one of their phones, their digital ID, which is your iPhone, it turned from green to red. And it seems that somebody standing behind the person who saw that, and then they panicked because they basically, it's all of it was like a half-hour monologue, and I'll have to keep it brief. But what that set in motion was that everybody immediately knew that they were standing in the same, say, supermarket, shopping mall, as somebody whose phone had just turned red. So therefore, on the algorithm, in this case, it's the Chinese state. Our version of this would probably be private. But then it was clear to everybody around that I need to get out. I need to get out of here because the state authorities, the police or whoever, are now on their way. And then what happens is we've been in contact with this person and that we need to get away. But that's too late because the system already knows you are there because you've got to have your phone with you and it can just look on the algorithm to see whose phones are there. And you get this kind of dystopian vision where, like you've got maybe 150 people inside of a supermarket buying groceries, and then one person's phone goes from green to red. And then all of a sudden, you imagine this on a movie, like all of a sudden everybody else, their phones start buzzing in their pocket because their phones are also now going from green to red. And it sets in motion this horrible kind of panic that they need to get away, which they couldn't do because if you are on a digital currency, that will just be cut off immediately so that you'll have to hand yourself in and get carted off to quarantine. Now, yeah, that's in China. Can it happen in the West? Is like what I'm interested in.
I mean, we're sprinting towards it, right? Like you look at countries like Australia and Canada, and it's insane. It's absolutely insane. You can't leave Canada if you're unvaccinated without like literally escaping your country like a war refugee. And so these places are absolutely sprinting towards it. Everybody now goes and they take out basically $1,000 loan to buy these newest phones. Eventually they're going to start locking these things to you like a collar, to implement exactly the scenario you're talking about.
Or chip. They'll just do away with the phone altogether.
Exactly.
They're all again, like you were saying, this is Alex Jones territory. I know it is, but they're literally talking about it. It's on the British government's website. They're talking about it along with facial recognition and all the rest of it. And so what happens is that there's a kind of trickle down effect. So in our case, it will be the corporations because Google will be in touch with Microsoft, who will be in touch with the digital currency, and it all links in. So in your kind of day-to-day routine, they are being that kind of the way they've got to abide by certain rules, zero carbon and all of this, that's going to get passed down to the consumer. And it has this weird effect where it means that all of the corporations want to know everything about you because they want to know how much you're consuming. They're gonna like how much meat have you consumed this week, and that's going to be also on your digital ID. I mean, some of it gets really wild where you get into crazy territory, but it is like it's all there at these kind of technocratic meetings where the smart fridge, again, it sounds so benign, like a smart fridge. What it actually means is that it's going to be, it'll know what's in there. It'll know what you're consuming. So then, just like a corporation, you too can be marked against your carbon footprint. And then the sort of the medical side of that is kind of the same thing.
Yeah, if anyone thinks any of this sounds crazy at this point, I think you're the crazy one, honestly. Like if you have looked at what's happened in the last few years and you think that any of this stuff is like out of the realm of possibility, or this sounds like a conspiracy or something, then you're just in an insane level of denial at this point. Like I doubt that those people are being honest with themselves. Because I think it's very clear, like you said, there's a reason all of this, there's a reason that they want everything to be, public transportation, because then you can immediately shut down mobility of someone if they've wrong think or they came into contact with the wrong thing, disease or whatever. And everyone, thought that they had retreated at some level with the COVID stuff. But the minute they got an option with this monkeypox thing to come back, you saw all the same restrictions start to flare right back up into place. All this machinery is now there and established, and they're just waiting for the next opportunity to kick it back on.
You saw it with the Canadian truckers, where you had all of these liberals. They got their narrative chip implant. And with the Canadian truckers, they were saying, well, why don't we have kill switches on these things? Why is it they still have the freedom to drive these giant rigs pretty like wherever they want? Like is it really that difficult to put a kill switch? So if for example, there's like 100 trucks on the way to Toronto to do a protest, by the way, against this very thing, then it stands to reason, and I know they'll be working on this now, where it's like, yeah, we don't like this, so in the future we're just going to put a kill switch, and they'll just stand dormant on the edge of the road. That's going to be the end of that. It's as simple as that, and it'll be embedded within every car.
Well, and that's how.
I was just going to say as well, and the same went for there. So I was talking about what the sort of horror story of China, but then all you need to do is look at the way they got the bank accounts closed in the truckers as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up, is that's how they ultimately killed this, right? The way they actually killed the protest was to shut down not just the like GoFundMe's that were bringing in the fuel and the food and paying the truckers' bills that allowed this to continue, but then shutting down the individual accounts and ultimately going after not only the truckers but their families and anyone who had ever donated. And they didn't even hesitate. They didn't just go for the people who were actively involved in the protest. They went scorched earth. That we'll shut down your grandma's ability to buy food. We'll shut down your ability to own a home. We'll shut down your ability for you to pay, to keep the lights on for your family. They just locked down any and everyone's bank accounts that they felt they could be connected. And eventually that's really what ended up breaking the backs of the truckers, was not any physical arrests or riot police or because most of what the truckers were doing was extremely peaceful, and they couldn't justify using direct force. It was bad optics to go in and like beat people who are just like honking horns on their trucks. But what you can do is completely shut down their bank accounts and the bank accounts of their families and anyone involved. And that way you don't have to lift a single truncheon. You don't have to, you made the comparison many times. The foxes that run our society, they're terrible at physical force. And every time they try to use it, we see the disasters that get involved. They're uncomfortable with force. They don't know how to keep law and order through force. Instead, they always want to use this nudge. They always want to use these soft systems. And so they're not going to continue tyranny by like sending guys with rifles out into the street. They're going to do it by just completely shutting your ability down to function in society.
Yeah, because I remember at the time when people were saying, oh, is it that they're going to have these like running battles with riot police and all of this? And what you saw was that they basically just pulled the plug on it. It's just it was as simple as that. There was no sort of last, like some kind of triumphant last stand in clouds of tear gas against armed riot police. It was just this, we'll just pull the plug on it, and then that's it. In Germany last year, because they had the COVID passes, then there was a fight and somebody died outside of a nightclub. I mean, the thing is, there's going to be people come out who actually support this, and we all know the kind of people who it's going to be as well. So there was a murder outside of a nightclub in Germany, and all the state again just looked at to see who was in the area via their digital IDs, which weren't supposed to be digital IDs. They were supposed to just be a kind of track and trace app to see who had recovered from the virus, the C19, and who had it and who had recovered, and that's what it was supposed to be there for. Well, what they actually used it for was to have a look to see who could act as a witness, because there was a fight outside of a bar and somebody died. So they just got in contact with everybody like that.
Well, obviously we're bringing a lot of doom and gloom here, so let's try to do a little something to maybe bring a little bit of hope on as we kind of get to the end of this hour. One thing that I have read about, and I made a video about it, is kind of how in the end the managerial elite are doomed. And if people want to see that, it's actually my best performing video, so if you want to go look at that, you can. I go into a lot more detail there. I'm not going to have all the quotes and everything at my fingertips, but basically we're already seeing how all of their power, all of this technocracy is based on this highly interconnected global system, right? That's what gives them their power is. They're the only ones. The managerial elite require a certain level of technical specificity and training and knowledge and capability in order to operate all these systems. And so they need all these different types of technology, like you're talking about, to make this work. But as they've been pushing towards this stuff, we see the things start to fray at the edges, right? We see the supply chain breakdown. We see they're predicting, rolling blackouts, and these different high prices and all these things, inflation. A lot of people say, well, this just feeds into that stuff. It allows them to deny you, your ability to drive around in your car and own a home. And yeah, all that stuff is true. Like, you're right about all that stuff. But I think there is actually a visible decline in the quality of their, like, the material quality of their system, right? And even as they push towards this infinite horizon of technological integration, they're doing so by undermining the fundamental stuff that allows things like power grids and the internet and stuff to stay operational. And yeah, they can reduce the standard of living through things like, 3D printed meat and stuff to, like, lower their operating cost, and they can make their populaces more compliant. But again, by doing that, you're reducing the talent pool that generates the civilization in the first place. And so, like, I think there is eventually a limit. Like, I think they do eventually hit a hard wall. Like, they do reduce the capability of their population and increase the complexity eventually to some level where it breaks. And I'm just interested in kind of what you think about that. Do you think that's possible? And if you do you think that's near term, farther term? How does that work?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be able to pull this off. I think already when you've become a meme on the internet and everybody's clipping your videos and using them as an example of a dystopia, I don't think they can do it. So I'm not. I mean, I'm kind of like, well, yeah, what they want to do is really bleak. The question is whether or not they can do it. Another thing that I think it creates is, I think it's a misunderstanding. I mean, you know, like in England, we have it's they can't even prevent like bootleg tobacco coming over from France and cheap beer and all of this. Even after all these years, all this stuff gets smuggled in. So the more control they want, and the more they want to make life boring, all they do is create incentives for people to get around it, and thereby undermine it straight away. And so, and then like the response to that would have to be even more draconian, until eventually you are just going to have people saying, "Look, this is absolutely ridiculous." I also think the life that it's offering people is just it's bleak and it's awful, but it's also like soul crushingly boring as well. And I just can't see it sort of replacing the current system. What I'm worried about is that when you're looking at the biggest corporations, hedge funds, and banks in the world, then it is the sunk cost fallacy. I mentioned that before, and it's like, they've all invested all of these trillions of dollars in all of this stuff, going forward to 2030 and beyond. They're not going to give that up easily. That's what worries me. If you're talking about these vast amounts of money which have been pumped into this whole system they've created, it's more like, how much of a bang is the Death Star going to make when it goes down? But I do think it's going to go down.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. My prediction is short term pain, but long term, this thing falls apart, and it's going to be ugly on its way. I don't think people are gonna. I don't think the way this comes apart is people struggle against it or resist against it, or even really reject it. I think the way this comes apart is real. Society degrades to the point where people look elsewhere. So I think we're in for some short term very unpleasant stuff, but I think long term these people are doomed. Though, like you said, the question is, how much of a bang does the Death Star make on its way out? I think that's a good point.
I mean, it's entered the discourse as being this evil, and there's been a lot of people on the dissident right who've saying, you shouldn't get too wrapped up on all of this stuff. It's a distraction. I don't think it is. I don't think it is because they've shown in the past few years that they will rock and roll, and it's clear they've got some big plans. And if you're involved in a kind of dissident sort of discourse on the internet, which is their domain, by the way, it's their stomping ground. They're just going to cut you off. It's as simple as that. So whatever your dissident politics is, you can't ignore this because they will just shut you down.
Which is why, Susan, of course, this program supports whatever the current thing is, and there's no reason to worry about it. Very, very safe. Pro, yes, Ukraine and all these things. We're very much supportive of whatever the current thing is. So,
I mean, another white pill is the war in Ukraine itself, because they haven't got it all locked up. They haven't got everything under control, because if they did, Putin would never have invaded Ukraine, because they had to kick him out of all of these institutions, and they kicked him out of the World Economic Forum and made Russia into a sort of pariah state. There was a great extra long Substack article by somebody Lyons, I think. I don't know if you know him. And he got all into this stuff about emerging sort of power blocks around the world. I know we were supposed to be cheering everybody up, but his conclusion was that we are entering into this kind of Orwellian world where you've got like 2 or 3 permanent power blocks around the world, but they're kind of all similar. So we wouldn't be that different to China. I know I'll let you start dishing out the white pills again. that was going in the wrong direction. But the thing to take away from Putin just outright snubbing the entire technocratic grid and the American deep state and everything is that there's rogue elements, there's black swans like that. They haven't got everything locked down. Their data sets and their modeling, it didn't account for everything. They're being caught out time and time again.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal. Like, I think that's actually, that last part is really important. And that's part of what I talk about in that video about the managerial elite is, they want you to think that they've got all the exits covered, right? They want you to think that there's no way out. But these things keep happening. Like, these things keep slipping through. And like, yes, they wield a large amount of power, but it's very clear that if they wanted to crush this stuff, they don't have it figured out. And I think that eventually, the more they try to push this stuff, the harder that becomes. Like, I think this system does break down in the long term, but I could be wrong. But
there's people in America, in Montana, I think it is, where another white pill, this is a serious one, is that on actual concrete legislation, especially in America, for some reason, they've always got problems with control at the local level. It's a recurring pattern again and again. We saw it during the pandemic, and there's this thing now in America and some states where the climate change, the sustainability stuff's just being thrown out on the local level, because this is the problem when you bypass on the one hand, the technological stuff, yeah, they've got that, so then you run into the problem of digital currencies, and everybody should be using more cash, because that is like sort of a Faustian pact with the iPhone where everything's on it, because eventually it is going to control you, even though it's handy and it's easy. We know it all is. But in terms of implementing policy, they're having a hell of a time of it in some places in America, especially. It's not going their own way. It's a kind of glitch they've got, is getting things done down at the level of a kind of like a local guy who works a job, and then he's a politician, because he is what happens is you get the middle guy between the public themselves, who he'll go to church with and he'll drink in the pub with, and then the higher ups. who are saying, well, you've got to bring in this like dystopian weird stuff, and he's deciding, well, no, I'm not going to do it. There's a weakness down at the local level with all of this stuff for them.
Yeah, I give people a hard time when they think that that just having some, some formal protection in the Constitution is actually going to save them from what comes next. But I will say that American federalism might be the thing that saves us at the end of the day, because it is so deeply ingrained in the power structure of the United States. It's really hard for them to subvert, and this is always the case with this stuff, right? That this the same people who are like, oh, we can win every war with like just air superiority and drone strikes now, right? Like we can get rid of all those hard charging guys who put boots on the ground, who are really inconvenient for a political narrative, because we can just drone strike everybody's submission. And then you lose a war to like goat herders in Afghanistan, right? Like there's this idea that you don't have to have the people necessary to like make things happen at the nuts and bolts level, because you've got the technology to like fly over it. And that again seems to be a consistent weak point that pops up for kind of this regime over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. So, I mean, we'll see what's happening, but I don't know. That we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
All right, guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and start working our way through the super chats. If you want to ask a question for Morgoth or myself, you can go ahead and drop it in there. We've already got a few, so we'll go ahead and kick things off. Again, if you have not subscribed to Morgoth's channel, the link is in the description, and also his Substack. I didn't have the link, but I'll make sure to add that in the description of the video as soon as we're done. So you can support him there, because absolutely should. All right, let's get started with Selfish Neuron for €5. Thank you. 1,500 private jets flying in enlightened elites to save the climate should be enough, or do you think we need 3,000 next time? And yeah, I mean, obviously, like these people are hypocrites, but remember, it's not hypocrisy; it's hierarchy, right? Like, it's not that they're not saying that people that transportation won't be necessary. They should have all the private jets that they need. You plebs, though, you don't, right? Like it's not hypocrisy, because they're important. They need to do this thing. You, however, you don't need that level of freedom. You need to make sacrifices. So I don't think you should be surprised when we see that kind of thing.
Yeah, they are the exception.
Yeah, they're never going to be caught out by arguments of fairness. So just mock them to be sure, but understand that calling out their hypocrisy is never going to be. You're never going to shame them into right behavior on those issues. Let me see. We got some super chats down here. I'm trying to find the comment to highlight it. I see it in my super chats, but I'm trying to find the actual comment here. Sorry, guys. Takes me a moment. As you know, I'm terrible at this. AA showed me how to make sure I find them, but I still have a hard time highlighting them, even though I know they're there. So at least I can hunt them down.
I just see one that I can answer straight away from King Cribble. He just says Newcastle or Sunderland. It's Newcastle for me.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, King Crabberland. All right. Let's see. Chiaro Scurio. Sorry, I'm sure I'm saying that exactly wrong. 20 pounds. Thank you. Iran is introducing digital ID to buy limited amounts of bread at subsidized prices using a digital coupon. Could there be situations where power-hungry elites see a good idea and implement it without global coordination? Interesting.
I mean, in the West, so what you get in a place like Iran or China is where the state itself just implements it. In the West, people are just signing up to all this stuff themselves. The thing where you like Mrs. Morgoth goes jogging, and there's this thing that counts how many steps she's done and all of this kind of thing. And it's nobody's forcing people in the West to do all of this stuff. They're doing it themselves. And by and large, it's the private corporations in the public-private partner scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your question, could they do something positive with this? Like, could they do something that benefits the people with this? Yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't think that it means that these people will never do something that is helpful to the people who they rule, but that will not be their primary motivation. So they might at times, or you might have a nation go rogue and use this technology to do something positive. I don't think these people are evil in the sense that like every single thing they want to do is to like utterly destroy you. But obviously, their vision of the future and their vision of what humanity should be is terrifying. So, like, they do seem like Bond villains, but I don't think they're actually Bond villains in the sense that like they see what they're doing as evil. They see it as good, and at times they might do things that could be beneficial in the moment, but overall the direction they're taking people is horrible, so I don't
Yeah,
think this is a positive step.
I mean, I think it's what we have to remember. They don't think they're evil. They think they've just got us kind of basically they've just got brains like calculators. They are technocrats, so they are just looking at numbers and models like a kind of supercomputer that's gone out of control. You know, in Terminator, or if you look at Isaac, because everybody would mention Terminator. If you look at Isaac Asimov's series on robots, it isn't because he actually had like a kind of bit of a technocratic mind himself, and in his robot series, the robots take over. They remove all power from humans. But what you find, like there's a kind of twist in the tale because you assume that it's because the robots were power hungry and evil, and it wasn't. What it was that it was programmed into the robots that they were never allowed to hurt humans, and they were never allowed to have allow any harm come to humans. So what it was like a fail safe which was programmed into the robots themselves, and then the robots just acted on that because they came to the conclusion that, well, the only way we can save humans is to remove all power from them and enslave them. Otherwise, they're going to be killing each other and they're going to be having wars. The only way we can actually keep them safe is to enslave them. It's purely logical, and this is often this is a kind of different take on the technocratic mind, where it's just like this supercharged autism where they've lost all kind of compassion and common sense out of this kind of Malthusian drive that they have towards the doing the greatest number of good.
Are you familiar with Nick Land's theory of accelerationism at all?
No, I'm not.
I think you would find it very interesting because it hits on something very similar, where basically these systems, the human element is taken out, and the technology is making so many decisions that it becomes a self reinforcing feedback loop, and the technological innovation drives the human decisions, and then the human decisions are basically removed entirely, and it's just the consumption is exciting the technological innovation. And so basically these technologies that were originally created to serve humans end up serving only themselves, and the process speeds so quickly that humans can no longer interact with the decisions. I would be interested in picking your brain on that. Maybe that's something we can do a different stream.
Yeah, I've tried reading them before and I found it really difficult.
I don't blame you. Nick Land is impenetrable in a lot of ways, so I did a primer video on it, so if you want to explore
check
that,
it out.
yeah, because I think you in particular would find that interesting in the implications, and that would be something I'd be interested in discussing with you at some point.
Yeah, I'll check it out.
All right, let's see. Firefox is red, Explorer is blue. Thank you for your donation. Thoughts on the city of Bologna starting a voluntary social credit system and Bavaria planning theirs? I got to say, I'm not up on any of those advances when it comes to voluntary social credit systems, but I would not be surprised at all that people are moving that direction, individual nations and things.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that they were doing that either. But you'll notice the voluntary is
right. Scare quotes.
Yeah. I don't know how you can have I'm sure they're doing it, but you can see the kind of paradox inherent in that, because the social credit system is about incentives towards creating certain kinds of behavior. So you can always just sort of voluntarily think, well, not this time. But the precedent is being set. It's there now. Just test it out. Just test it out. Just test it out and see how you feel. Test it out. We'll do it just in terms of how often you go jogging and your diet, how much exercise you're taking. It'll do you good. It's just there for your health. And of course, it's like, oh, well, I'll give it a go. We'll see. I'll get back to you and tell you how I feel, if I feel fitter in 2 weeks. And it's like, the camel's nose is in the tent.
Yeah, and I don't know how it is everywhere, but in the United States, we certainly have basically a soft social credit system anyway, right? Like there's literally our credit scores. And the credit score, it was originally just determined like whether or not you could get a loan or your interest rate on your credit card. But now it's being used as to whether you can rent, and then it was used as to like your homeowner's insurance can be adjusted on a like a month to month basis depending on your credit score, and more things outside of your lending history are being brought into there. First it was your employment, and then it was whether you have certain reports or things against you. It's only a matter of time where that score basically is factoring your political views as well, right?
Yeah.
And so ours will just be a privatized credit score. That's a social credit score. It just won't be done by the government. It will simply be done by private corporations who all use these services, right?
And this is where you get into the whole data harvesting thing. So that will all of that will just be processed it within seconds through the algorithm, which will then paint a digital picture of you and mark you in certain ways.
Absolutely. Let's see our next one here. Nirkesh for $5. Thank you very much. Corporations aren't people because modern society expects them to adhere to a standard of ethics. Well, that's a good quip, but of course, they do expect people to conform to a particular standard of ethics. It just has nothing to do with what we thought used to be ethical, right? You can have all the hedonism we want when it comes to drug addiction or your sexual activities or those kind of things, but there is a very strict dogma as to what you have to adhere to personally and ethically when it comes to observances of holy days like Saint Floyd or public. You need to publicly support the Ukraine or whatever. Everyone's favorite month is coming up soon, where all of our corporations will alter their corporate logos to pay homage to the national the state religion. So don't worry, like those we're very much expected to conform to that standard of ethics. But I know what you're saying there.
Yeah, it's kind of like the butcher in Havok's
Yes, exactly.
Vaclav Havels. So we are all so the ESG or woke capital. However, I'll have to have a look at if that's the case. I think it is that they are now bound to, let's just, well, for whatever reason we've got woke capital. And then when you go along and you buy your rainbow, you buy your milkshake with your like rainbow flag on from Burger King or whatever, you are then endorsing that. You are then also signaling that you are on board with it. It's like you've placed a little banner outside of your grocery shop saying like "Workers of the world unite" or "Marxism will be triumphant." You're signaling your support for the regime. Except in this case, it isn't like the original sort of American flag is being replaced now, and this is now you have a rainbow one. So the actual nation, the national flag of the nation goes, and then you get this purely corporate one in its place.
Yeah, the difference between the symbols of the nation and and the symbols of the empire, and this is Moldbug had a really great essay about the total state and how the digitalization of kind of the public square means that everyone is constantly required to be performative about these things, right? It's not just enough to display it in the window of your store. In your personal life, people can check in and check your window, your own personal grocer window, to see if you're currently displaying the flag in every thought and feeling that you signal online. If you're missing a Facebook post or an Instagram post about an issue, that is a reason for suspicion. It's not just that you said something wrong, it's that you didn't signal compliance to the current thing. And that's the series of tweets that I've kind of put together with the total state. And it's a thing I talk about a lot is you see these overt signaling of that we are now required to perform the ritual and show your allegiance, not just outside your window, but in every personal interaction.
Yeah,
Because they're now public.
and in a surveillance, the grid, social credit system, that would all happen automatically. The picture of you, which would be built up in the cloud or in the algorithm, that would all happen automatically based on just on what you're watching on YouTube or what tweets you like and all of this.
So there's this podcast that was called, I want to say, Afterlife or something like that. And basically it was like a serialized novel where they talked about um basically an AI that would reconstruct your dead loved ones off of their posts and put it together, and basically like they could create this simulacrum of a human based on all the different video and thoughts that you had left on the internet after. And they would like basically they contacted vulnerable people and sold them this service, and then they like turned them, they weaponized them by requiring them to do certain things because they would cut off access to this digital simulacrum of their loved one. And that podcast hit me really hard because it was something I listened to right after the loss of my first wife. So that had like a lot of personal impact, but it's terrifying thinking about then the need to like to signal these things publicly, because then even the memory of humans is altered, right? Like there's a permanent stamp of the regime on the digital memory of every human who had to like signal compliance. And basically you can rewrite history of like who humans were because they were required to like signal their compliance in the only record that will last for most of them beyond when they're gone. And it's just, I don't know, something that sticks in my brain.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so then you've got the metaverse, which is,
Yeah.
it's a bit late to get in all of that as well, but it's all heading in this direction and it's all interlinked. You can buy property in the metaverse now.
Yeah, well, because now BlackRock owns all the property here, so you have to create
Yeah, you'll
new
do it.
property to
It's like, say, the perfect day in long years ago with my first girlfriend when I'm 16, and we had this like long lazy summer's perfect day together. Is it where everything becomes so miserable that I'm allowed to kind of recreate that day like forever? It's truly and they sell you this stuff with big cheesy smiles and happy little
yeah.
sort of promotional videos, and it's truly hellish. It really is.
Yeah, I want to say there's a Black Mirror episode also that kind of echoes that. About there's one where they could like delete and alter the memories, as they went, so you could shape this, and you'd be stuck reliving these certain things. But anyway, sorry, gonna fall down that rabbit hole. We could do a whole nother couple hours on that. Let's see, King Cribble. Oh, this is the one that you had already answered there. Thank you very much for your donation. Let's see our next one here. Tree Climber 4099, they keep slaughtering our school children, hoping we will submit. We must stand up against this, not give in. I mean, yeah, obviously, in the United States, this is a big issue right now. Thank you for your donation, Tree Climber. They're pushing against, yet another collapse of the Second Amendment because of a very tragic event here recently. I just made a video on that as well, if people want to check that out. I think, of course, that you can't, and I think at this point people have become cynical enough, as sad as this is, to recognize when these people are just standing on the backs of dead children. As horrible as that is, and as terrible that is, that your country can't come together over something as horrific as that. I think people now understand what this is. And I don't think you're shaming a lot of conservatives into agreeing with this. And I think in the end, they're not going to make a lot of headway. They literally can't enact what they want to do without something very, very serious. So I don't think they can. But anyway, I don't know if Morgoth has any thoughts on that one. But
no, it's very
yeah.
much an American tragedy,
Yeah.
and I'm a bit distant from that. I think you did a good job there.
Thank you. Let's see. Nathan Hood, £10. Thank you very much. Perhaps the development of AI is an attempt to overcome the impossibility of human managers modeling all situations. AI is much smarter and may be able to take over the managerial role. Absolutely, Nathan. And I've had a number of people mention this. I think you're right about that. And I think I've at least what has been communicated to me. I am a complete Luddite when it comes to this stuff. I have no like I much more with the philosophical implications than the like nuts and bolts um uh technical stuff. So I've had people tell me that this is already being done in some disciplines where managers can't handle tasks, and so they're farming some of this stuff out to algorithm based stuff. I think there's already that stuff to be filled in, and then again, that's where accelerationism comes in, right? That's exactly like the terrifying stuff that accelerationism would predict, right? Is that these managers put the decisions in the hands of these computer systems. It's funny because I misread the headline. I guess there was some issue, and actually Morgoth might know more about this. I guess there was some issue where they couldn't raise the amount of like stipend that was being given to people in the UK because of limitations of like the computer software. Like literally, there just wasn't the ability to add a digit or something in the middle of the year, and so they couldn't up the amount of payout to people. But I thought it was saying that the computer had said like they just couldn't statistically come up to it. Apparently, I misunderstood that. But eventually, that day will come, right? Where like the AI simply hands down the decision. Sorry, like we can't bring this about, and so the computer crunching the numbers and saying we can't make this happen will be the justification as to why the managers don't move forward with something, right?
Yeah, the everything with the pandemic. I mean, a lot of the pandemic policy, if you heard all the way through, it was based on modeling. It was literally like computers just spitting out modeling and then that being implemented as policy.
Absolutely. Let's see. Our next one here, uh, QWERTY ZZ7, $10 Canadian. Thank you. I'm currently engaged in incrementalism in Toronto. I'm focusing on hard capital, easy in, and cannot be lied about. Yeah, I mean, again, my sympathies to those of you in Canada. I now have a number of online friends who are kind of trapped over there, and it's a very difficult situation. Um, and the only thing you can do is incremental preparedness and that kind of thing. So best of luck to you. I think you're doing what you can, and I can only hope that something turns around there, because it is insane to me what's going on and how compliant a large chunk of the population is over there, and so it seems like a very difficult situation. I can only wish you the best. Let's see. All right, I think we made it through all the super chats there. So, yep, I think we got through them. All right, well, thank you again very much, guys. I really appreciate it. One more time, if you are not subscribed to Morgoth, if you are not on his Substack, you should definitely do all those things. Like I said, Morgoth and I, we don't agree on everything all the time, but he's just very insightful. It's always worth hearing what he has to say. He's always coming at things at a different angle, and I think it's super important to have those different voices, because everybody's catching things, right? Just bringing a slightly different perspective, of catching things other people don't see. And I think it's extremely valuable to make sure that we're reaching out and staying in contact and getting to view these different angles, because I think it gives us a better idea of what we're up against and what's going on. So make sure you're checking out everything he's doing. Thank you so much for those who came by and super chatted. I want to go ahead and personally thank a few people who are subscribers on my Subscribestar: Easter Worshipper, AWXYZ, Santa 9901, and Nurkesh, and then user E04 25302. I think that was just a computer generated name, but I want to get those thanks out there anyway. You guys are all doing really big help in donating there. If you want to be thanked personally on the stream, or want to check out the newest Subscribestar only video that I just posted there, you can go check out the link below to do that. If you want to do that, I'm putting a new video up every month there, just for people who are in Subscribestar. So if you want to have access to those, please go ahead and check that out. And I just want to again thank Morgoth so much for coming on. It's always a pleasure, man. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll have a new Morgcast up tomorrow. It's already there. We're waiting to go up on Substack, and then it'll go on to Odyssey a few days later. I want to process it. I'm working on a video this week also related to the Morgcast about this. The simple fact is the Tory party allowed a million migrants to settle in Britain last year, and I'm not very happy about that. So there's going to be quite a bit of content on that subject coming soon. So thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks again for stopping by. We really appreciate it. And always, we'll talk to you next time.